The Crown Season 3 Recap. Episodes 1. Olding. In October 1964, as Britain welcomes new Prime Minister Harold Wilson, Elizabeth hears rumours that Wilson is working for the KGB under the alias Olding. She rebuffs them as gossip but learns from a dying Winston Churchill that he was suspicious of Wilson during his time as Prime Minister. Margaret, now Countess of Snowdon, suffers a failing marriage to Tony. The following year, while at Churchill's funeral, Elizabeth witnesses Wilson engage in conversation with Russians. In Washington, D.C., a sleeper agent informs the Department of Justice of a KGB mole inside Buckingham Palace. Elizabeth later discovers that her art advisor, Sir Anthony Blunt, is the mole but decides to keep the truth secret for fear of reputational damage. Philip confronts Blunt and finds he knows about the Profumo affair. Episodes 2. Margaretology. In 1965, Margaret and Tony embark on a tour of the United States, visiting cities along the West Coast and staying with an Arizona family before attending Tony's book launch in New York. In the UK, Wilson tells Elizabeth that the country needs a financial bailout from President Lyndon B. Johnson, and invites him to come to Britain to discuss the issue. After 3 failed attempts, Wilson concludes that Johnson declines because the United Kingdom did not support America in the Vietnam War. At the last minute, Johnson invites Margaret to a private dinner at the White House, where her informality and sense of fun persuades him to help with the bailout. Philip later advises Elizabeth not to give her any more responsibilities. Episodes 3. Aberfan. In October 1966, following the Aberfan disaster, Elizabeth decides not to visit the village, despite Wilson's attempts to convince her to go. Philip attends the funeral of the children who died. The public blames the National Coal Board for the disaster before blame shifts toward the government. Hearing suggestions that she is not being sympathetic, Elizabeth confronts Wilson, who says this came from someone in his cabinet. Elizabeth later visits Aberfan, laying flowers on the graves and visiting grieving families. In private, she cries while listening to a recording of the hymn sung at the children's funeral. Episodes 4. Bubbikins. Elizabeth learns that Princess Alice, who has been living in Athens, Greece, is in danger from the recent imposition of military rule. She arranges for Alice to come and stay at Buckingham Palace, despite Philip's protests. As Elizabeth and Anne look after Alice, the royal family participates in a documentary to show the public they are normal people. Critics rebuff the documentary, prompting Philip to arrange an interview for Anne with Guardian reporter John Armstrong. However, Armstrong interviews Alice instead, and the subsequent article is a success, resulting in Philip making amends with his mother. Episodes 5. Coup. In 1967, Elizabeth and Portia travel to France and America to learn about modern methods of racehorse breeding and training, while Wilson finally decides to devalue the pound. Cecil Harmsworth King meets Lord Mountbatten, and proposes a plan to replace Wilson. Mountbatten is attracted by the idea, but raises concerns about whether it is practicable. Wilson calls Elizabeth to raise his suspicions. Elizabeth scolds Mountbatten, who later visits Alice to discuss old age and their place in society. Episode 6. Tywysog Cymru. On advice from Wilson, Elizabeth sends Charles, who has found happiness and a taste for amateur dramatics at Cambridge, to Wales to learn Welsh before his investiture as Prince of Wales. He befriends tutor Teddy Millward and becomes sympathetic to his Welsh nationalism. Charles's decision to include statements in his speech expressing support for Wales irritates Elizabeth. Charles requests a meeting with his mother, hoping for appreciation or even affection, but receives neither. He is told he must suppress his personal opinions. Charles returns to Cambridge and stars in a performance of Richard II, where Anne is in attendance. Episode 7. Moondust. In 1969, During the first moon landing, Philip starts feeling dissatisfied with his lack of achievement and searches for inspiration. When Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin visit Britain as part of their world tour, Philip arranges a private interview. Asking them what being on the moon was like, he is disappointed by their mundane answers and their elementary questions about palace life. Philip later complains about the Dean of Windsor, prompting Elizabeth to have the Dean retire and name Robin Woods his successor. Woods invites Philip to take part in the religious academy he has opened in the castle grounds. Philip tells the group he has lost his faith following his mother's recent death, and asks for their help in restoring it. Episodes 8. Dangling Man. Charles is in a love triangle with Andrew Parker Bowles and his girlfriend Camilla Shand. Anne has an affair with Parker Bowles. Elizabeth meets the Duke of Windsor before his death. They reflect upon the circumstances that led to her becoming queen. He asks for forgiveness, but she remarks that she is sometimes thankful that he abdicated. He gives her Charles's letters to him, which she reads with concern. Edward Heath becomes Prime Minister following the 1970 general election. Episodes 9. Imbroglio. Electricity supply is being rationed because of the miners' strike. Charles trains at Dartmouth. Lord Mountbatten and Elizabeth succeed in stopping the relationship between Charles and Camilla. Charles is posted overseas in the Caribbean for 8 months. After the Queen Mother talks to the parents of Parker Bowles and Camilla, they get married. The Queen hears from Anne about her affair with Parker Bowles and her belief that Camilla is destined for him, not Charles. Episodes 10. Cri de Coeur. After her marriage continues to fall apart, Margaret is introduced to Roddy Llewellyn, and they begin a relationship. They visit the Caribbean, where they are photographed together. The pictures are printed in the newspapers. Elizabeth calls them back to Britain based on advice from her mother. Amidst turnover in Parliament, Margaret attempts suicide, although after Elizabeth visits her, they bond again and talk about her failed marriage and their age. Britain celebrates Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee, marking her 25th anniversary as sovereign on the 7th of June 1977. The end. Please subscribe my YouTube channel Teddy's Best Story Time. See you next time.